Hello, everyone. Welcome to Not Us podcast, hosted by two sisters, myself, Angela, and my gorgeous sister, Samantha, where we talk about change, choices, and we celebrate all those messy bits in between.
We're not licensed doctors, therapists, gurus, or witches. The stories and opinions expressed in this episode are our own, for entertainment only, and subjected to change. Swearing is likely, and please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Ange, what are we discussing today?
Well, I'm really excited for this conversation, but only after you had to tell me off in the way that only a Leo can, when I thought that this conversation wasn't really one that was top of the list of things that people are talking about in the world today. I am ashamed to admit my ignorance, and I'm hoping that there are other ignorant people like me, and also hoping that they aren't, because I did not realize that World AIDS Day is 100% relevant, needs to be spoken about, and now more than ever, when other things have had more spotlight shone on them. So, Sam, I'm really grateful that we're having this conversation this week. The world celebrates is a strange word to use, but has World AIDS Day on the 1st of December every year. And growing up, it was, certainly for us growing up in South Africa, it was a hot topic 20 years ago. We come from a community where we've got friends who were living with AIDS. We had friends who were dying because of AIDS-related diseases. So it was very relevant in our lives then. And I'm not sure for me now, if it's because I've moved to the UK, that conversation is a little quieter. I don't know if that's true for you as well.
You know, sis, I think you raise a really good point. And coming from a marketing and a communications background, if I think about all of the awareness days that, from a corporate perspective, we place awareness on, I don't think World AIDS Day is high on the agenda any longer. And it's crazy to think because it's still so relevant in our lives. And in preparation for today's recording, this is our fourth time trying to record this episode, by the way. So we've had a number of tries at it, but we do feel it's an important conversation, especially because our podcast is about change, choice, and celebrating the messy in-betweens. And on the back of our most recent episode about dating in 2025, I think it's even more relevant that we have in this conversation. And it's more relevant for us to be informed and educated. And this morning, when I was thinking about the episode, I thought to myself, if I'm really honest with myself, the last time that I had an informed sex education discussion was probably in high school. And that's,
You mean other than with me?
Note that I said informed, studied backed,
not experience driven.
Not every conversation that I have, but a really informed and backed by studies and understanding what the world looks like. And I think that's, almost 30 years ago. And yes, we have many conversations that have sexual topics included. And it's not to say by any means do I feel that I am silly. I just think when you've been in a long-term relationship, or maybe ignorant actually as well, because having been in same-sex relationships, you think that you're kind of immune to a lot of STDs and STIs, and that's not true. And as we think about what it is that we want to bring forward into conversations through the podcast, I felt that this was a really important conversation to have, just because it's still very relevant in the world that we live in. Granted that we both live in Northwest Europe now, it's a topic that is under a lot more control and really a conversation around policy now. But back in South Africa and Southern Eastern Africa, 21.9 million people are living with HIV. And that is half the number of people living in the world are living in Sub-Saharan Africa and Eastern Africa have got HIV. It's significant, and it's a very different conversation in different parts of the world. And so if we look at the conversation in Johannesburg and Durban, it's a heterosexual conversation. If we look at the East, it's not a disease that's necessarily transferred through sex or through blood to blood, but it's a disease that is transferred through drugs and the usage of needles, etc. which is wild because I remember being in primary school and hearing about needlepox in Sweden. So you would think that that kind of education would be worldwide by now, but apparently it's not. And so
Yeah.
I really think it's an important conversation, even in 2025, that we are aware of the day. We are not wearing red ribbons, but that we're aware of the day and that we're educating ourselves. It's
You have red
37 years.
lipstick on though, so just
We,
this was intentional because we don't have ribbons. Red lips for
that's
sure.
right.
But
That's right.
but just in 2024, there were 1.3 million new HIV infections and 630,000 HIV-related deaths. So that number is still significant. And what's interesting to me is how, as you say, that conversation has changed. Back in the day, especially because we knew a lot of gay men, we were in the gay community, the stigma was that this was only transmitted through men having sex with other men. And there was so much shame and judgment and everything around that. And so that's why it became quite hidden and it really wasn't spoken about. So the reason for awareness during that time was so educational on the very basics. Then we got to the area of antiretroviral drugs, which have been a complete game changer. But even asking for that or going on that or admitting you're on it was, again, shame, judgment, fear-based. And it's really interesting to me how anything that's related to sexual interaction with people seems to carry the stigma. So even though, as you're saying, people caught it in another way, people are too scared to speak out. And so it really is so important that we put a voice to these conversations and bring them relevant to where they are today. I mean, I think of even as kids, in terms of education, like the whole blood brother thing. You know, when we were at school, I had a prefect badge. I mean, how I got to be a prefect, Lord
One
alone knows.
wonders.
But, you know, either way, I remember taking my prefect badge and the pin at the back and engraving in my leg, like my boyfriend's initials, you know, and friends, like we would do the blood brother thing, like make some blood and rub our blood together. You didn't think about infection, disease, any of the others. Everyone kissed each other and shared bodily fluids freely. We live in a very different world now.
Listen, I was just thinking, I am so grateful that we did not grow up together, that I had a little bit of, that I only got to meet you when I was a fully formed adult, because I don't know how I would feel about my sister engraving into her skin her boyfriend's name.
I was a passionate Scorpio.
You
Big
definitely are
expressions of love.
passionate. Definitely passionate. We'll call it passion. Psycho. But maybe just, I think that introduces a really interesting point, is how is it spread? And so I think it's really important for us to understand how AIDS is spread. Unprotected sex,
Mhm.
blood-to-blood contacts, and birthing or breastfeeding when not on treatment. And you said, I think you said 1.3 million people in 2024
Mhm.
were newly infected or diagnosed. In the US, they estimate that about 13% of people who are infected do not know that they're infected.
Wow.
Now, that's a US stat, but we can assume that that is probably higher in other countries as well. But a point to like raise is that, you know, in the 80s and 90s, people were dying. You know, you got HIV, and then a couple of years later, it became AIDS, and that was a death sentence.
Mhm.
Now, I had a look at what is the number for total HIV infections since the epidemic. I think it's called an epidemic, not a pandemic. And it is 91.4 million have been infected with HIV since the start. And the start being June of 1981, that's when it was diagnosed as a disease. We've been celebrating or bringing awareness to World AIDS Day since 1988. So that's 37 years of awareness around that. But it's been part of our lives since 1981. So we definitely grew up in that generation of being very much informed, aware, and scared into believing that it was part of our lives and we needed to be quite aware of it. But I want to maybe just bring up 5 myths because I think it's important to
Myth bust.
myth bust. There we go. So,
So, Mythbusters. Oh, you could call Mythbusters.
she's passionate, folks. She's passionate.
Like,
Okay, so number one, and probably a belief that I had was women who sleep with women can't transmit HIV.
mm-hmm.
It's not true. Transmission between women is lower, but not zero. And so, blood, vaginal fluids, shared toys, certain STIs, co infections all matter. A lot of queer women assume they're magically protected. And I've got to say that I was one of those. And so, coming out of a long term relationship, that definitely is something to consider. Number two, HIV is only a concern for gay men. And I think we all know that for a long time, AIDS and HIV was considered a gay man or bi man's disease. This is not true. 44% of all new infections are women and girls.
Cool.
And the remaining 56% looks different country to country, region to region. As I said earlier on, in South Africa, it's more of a heterosexual man disease. In Europe, it might be more of a gay man and a bi man's disease. But in the East, it's based on drugs. Young women in parts of Africa are at triple the risk of their male peers, which is quite alarming. Number three, if he looks healthy, he must be fine. There is no such thing as a look. People who look the healthiest are the ones who are on medication or the ones never tested. Number four, PrEP is only for men who sleep with men. And I had this conversation with a friend and I was like, well, I don't know if men were on my interest, should I be on PrEP? And my friend was like, are you mad? No, that's for gay men. Apparently not. It's for straight women, queer women, trans women, non-binary people, heterosexual men, and anyone who has sex, period. So
Mm.
if you are not going to be testing, if you're someone who likes to live in the moment, it's best that you are looking at having PrEP as part of your toolkit. And then number five, HIV is basically over. People don't get it anymore. And that's not true. There are 40 million people in the world currently living with HIV. And as Angela said earlier on, 630,000 people last year alone died from AIDS-related diseases.
Yeah. And 1.3 million were infected in 2020.
100% newly infected. And that's crazy. I mean, it's really crazy for me. I did reach out to a couple of our friends, if I can find my phone, to ask them, is the discussion around AIDS still relevant to them? And I'm going to read 3 of their feedbacks. Number one, it's anonymous. I've chosen to keep this anonymous. World AIDS Days is very important. We need to continue raising awareness. Albeit having come a long way and treatment providing fantastic support for 100% normal life for those who are carrying the disease, I see it as I have close friends who are. There's still a lot of stigma when a test result comes back unexpected. And just as a last reminder, undetectable equals untransmittable. And so what we mean by undetectable is your viral load. And that's what the treatment does, is to bring that viral load down to zero. Another person said, World AIDS Day still holds an impact to me as Generation X. We had icons lost to the disease that were part of our youth. As a father, I worry that due to the preventative drugs and treatment, the awareness for the younger generation is not as deeply embedded as it was for us. It's why it's necessary to keep ensuring that we stay focused on sharing awareness. And then the last one was, I have a friend who lives with HIV, and it's altered my thoughts and perception about the disease. So many of his friends have been diagnosed and have gone on to live very long and healthy lives. It's so different now to the stigma it had in the 80s and part of the 90s. It's interesting that 2 people, similar ages, both said, one said there's still stigma around the disease. And I suppose when you've now got to share the information, and the other one saying, well, there's less stigma around the disease.
I suppose that's always depending on your community.
Yeah.
right? If I think of some of my friends who've been living with HIV/AIDS, because they're on antiretrovirals, they go to the gym, they look after their diet, they are strong, muscular, healthy-looking men that you would never imagine ever have, if anything, And I guess sometimes where this comes into question for me is when you are when you're going to be intimate with someone. Here's the debatable question. I've had this debate not too long ago with another gay friend of mine. Is it up to you to ask your partner, and not only when it comes to HIV/AIDS, but any STDs and STIs, is it up to you to ask the partner that you're going to engage with if they have anything? Or is it up to you and your responsibility to let someone know about that before you engage in sexual activity? I mean, it's not a sexy way to start a conversation, is it?
It's not. And we had a chat yesterday about when you're dating again, you said you've got a couple of friends who will not get intimate until there is a clear STD
Doctors
check
report in front of them.
or report or something along those lines. But here's the reality. Once you've got something, you can't turn back the time. And I think that it's always your responsibility, you as the individual, to be making sure that you're making the right choices for yourself, because whatever happens in the long run, you've got to live with those choices.
Yeah.
But I do know, and we've had this conversation years ago. I remember us driving to Sun City when you and I had this conversation, where you had said, well, a couple of your friends had said, if you don't ask, you don't tell.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the motto. And I can understand why people would have that approach. I don't know that I agree with it, but I can understand why there might be that approach because of the stigma around it. But I think that when you're being intimate, there are two people that are responsible.
Or
And
more,
you've
depending
got
on
to,
the party.
I beg your pardon?
I said, or more, depending on the party.
Yeah, well, there we go. There are the people involved are the people that are responsible. And so I think that you as an individual, you've got to know what your risk tolerance is like. Now, I like certainty, so
Mhm.
I don't know how I don't know how sexy those conversations are going to be in the future. Hi, can I please have your STD report as well as your entire history?
It's a lot to start with. It's a lot to kick off a flirt with. But yeah, even a friend of mine and I spoke about this the other day, and he said, no, it's not up to you to tell anyone. You've got to put all the protection in place. It's everyone's responsibility to look after themselves, to protect themselves, as you said, to ask the questions. Now, again, there are arguments on both sides, passionate arguments. I'd be really interested to hear from those of you who are listening or watching this, what your thoughts are on upfront disclosure of any STD, STI, anything that's related to your body. Do you share that upfront? Or do you assume that someone is clean and A for away if they don't say anything?
I mean, sis, at our age, can we assume that anyone is clean? We
Well,
have to assume that
answer,
the people in our age group have been around the block a couple of times. And so,
especially if we've grown up in times when it was a bit more reckless.
yeah,
The biggest debate was using a condom or using any other PrEP.
yeah,
That was around getting pregnant, not around anything else. I mean, that's, if you think of even HPV virus, that wasn't even spoken about for
exactly.
half of our lives, and that was when we were the most susceptible to it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Sis, you know that I love a debate and I love two sides of an argument.
Mm.
But
Yes,
there
ma'am.
are certain things where I'm like, there's only one side of the argument, and that's my side of the argument.
Mm.
And my viewpoint, not that you're asking me for my viewpoint, but I'm going to say that my viewpoint is I think that it is the person's responsibility to declare. I do appreciate that there's going to be stigma around it, but I do think that it is your responsibility. But having said that, I am saying that from someone who is not impacted. And so I don't know what that might be like. I am probably a little naive in that I like to believe that the world is a fair place and that you should show up fairly. And part of being fair is to give the other person opportunity to make the decision. But then let's understand the world is not always fair. And so you have to go in a little bit more boldly and advocate for yourself and ask the question. And the best that you can hope for is that the person on the other side will be honest.
Yeah.
So myth about PrEP only being for gay men, I think that's really important. If you're not certain and you're not going to do the cautionary option, then I think you've really got to think about PrEP being part of your regime and of your lifestyle. And it's quite interesting that South Africa, and there's 7.8 million people in South Africa that live with HIV, and 18% of those are women, actually. So it's a lower women rate.
Mm-hmm.
But next year, they're looking at rolling out a twice yearly injectable PrEP, starting with about 456,000 people that are at high risk.
Wow.
And that's something to be proud of. I actually think that's a great initiative. So it's quite interesting when you see cutting edge science and brutal inequality can live in the same place.
Wow. That is the contradiction that Africa often is, right?
100%.
Just on that, I'm wondering if for those who are parents who are listening or watching, how do you prep and educate your child about not only HIV/AIDS, but that's the sex conversation, the birds and the bees? How do you share the important information without making them scared, letting it be kind of a natural flow of life? And I think it must be a tough job to be a parent and find that balance right of educating your kids on topics like this without instilling fear, but letting them make wise choices for themselves, for their bodies. And I'm wondering if there are loads of programs, if those of you listening, if there are great programs or guides on how to do this that you know of, pop them into the chat, because I haven't seen that much. I mean, I'm not parenting a young child, so I wouldn't necessarily know. Do you know of any of those kinds of programs or advice on what the best approach would be?
Not me directly, but I know like a couple of years ago, I was watching a program in the afternoon. And there was a great book that I actually wanted to get for a friend's daughters that was about knowing your body and, just being aware. I think we definitely rely on schools to educate, but I'd agree with you. It's the community. So the parents, the aunts and the uncles, whatever the setup might be, in terms of educating first themselves and then the younger generation. But I wonder, Ange, what was your birds and bees conversation like?
Please, like anyone, like my poor sweet mother was going to have that conversation with me. She tried. Too late. I was such a rebellious child, teenager. By the time that conversation was even, and she's old fashioned, you don't even refer to it as sex education. It literally is the birds and the bees. I laughed when on our previous dating one, when Chloe said her mom refers to her vagina as
Fairy.
the fairy and the man as the pirate. I mean, it's just all of this language that we use with our children and with each other. Bless my mother. I grew up in a small town where there was not much else to do except behave or engage in hooligan behavior. So by the time she came to me with these wise words, I was like, not willing to listen, but thought I had all the answers, thought that I knew everything. But at the time, all I needed to know about was whether you could get pregnant or not. That was all that you were actually interested in. And you knew that pregnancy meant that you were going to be in big trouble. So that was really all it was. And that's a sign of that time. And certainly now, and maybe where location as well, because I look now at parents in the UK and just how they engage with their children, how they make them part of conversation, educating them in little bits and little bits all along. So I guess what I want to say is we never spoke about sex in our house. You didn't see it. You didn't watch it on the television. In the 80s and 90s, it was like the worst thing you could imagine in your whole world would be to walk in on your parents having sex. I mean, basically, you would be in therapy for the rest of your life or be watching Dallas or something. Someone started getting it on. Everyone wanted to die. It was unspoken. You can't go from unspoken to then having a whole sexual education or think that your child's going to have open and honest conversation with you on the topic. So I can only but hope that families are way more open about this very natural part of our existence. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have sex in the first place. And yet suddenly it's like something that must be not spoken about until you're of childbearing age.
Until you get married.
That's right. And
You
then you
know,
are flowered.
deflowered. Um, I mean,
I
Denise,
laugh, but actually that's a very real thing for many people of many cultures and religions. Yeah. I don't mean to disrespect anyone's choices.
yeah.
But that choice does not mean ignorance. You can have choice, but educating yourself and being aware is
But that's what you've just said there is actually really very important. You can't go from not having a conversation and sex being taboo, a
mm,
taboo discussion, and then want to have an education conversation. It just doesn't make any sense. And I remember when I was growing up, my mother got us books. We had at different ages, and some of it was about your body, etc., etc. And then, of course, when I got to being a teenager, the conversation was a little bit different. And it was around, if you want to start engaging, let me know and I'll put you on the pill.
that's right.
That was the conversation. Of course, I knew the woman that mothered us. I was like, there's no way in hell I would be letting you know because you would kill me. So I wouldn't need to go on the pill. But and then the risk is that you are getting educated by your peers who know as little as you
Mhm,
do. And then you're relying on some school program, which again, I would almost assume that today could be quite a minefield for
mhm.
teachers and educators to navigate because your classrooms look so diverse.
Yeah,
But we are way beyond school age. And I think that for us, it's really important to stay, besides the many conversations that we have, we are
daily.
two fools leading each other.
Leading each other astray. Or like we spoke about on the previous episode, my best friend and I, Petra, hashtag friends helping friends copulate.
Responsibly, responsibly.
Responsibly. Oh, dear.
Okay. But before we wrap up this conversation, this is a serious topic.
Yeah.
And I think I might have mentioned it earlier on. From a corporate perspective, there's a number of days that we are aware of. There's a number of awareness days, awareness months. From your perspective, Ange, because you do internal communications within your organization, do you think that those days still have relevance? I don't think that International Chocolate Day gets enough exposure, but that's just me.
No, no,
What
that never
about
gets
you?
exposure. Although I must say, in our space, it gets plenty exposure. And that's because people like me have the ear of the catering and the engagement teams. How about chocolate fountains? But no, seriously, I think that it's like almost every other day. You've got World Penguin Day. This week was also International Day for People with Disabilities, which is a massive topic. And certainly in the workplace, that is such an important topic, creating spaces where people feel included, they feel comfortable. And we also know that there's a huge percentage of disabilities that's not seen. The same as we're saying with HIV/AIDS or any of those other things that people are living with, that they're often is something silent that they live with. So I think that you've said this to me before with your marketing expert hat on, that we just get exhausted, right? If you've got too much happening every single day, what do you pick and choose? Which one do you choose to highlight? So for that, that was a reality in my world this week. Do I choose to highlight World AIDS Day? Do I focus for the workplace on International Day for Persons with Disabilities? Which do you pick? And so that's probably why it's important to know what is the thing that you're passionate about. And you can drive that in your area of influence. And if everyone does that, then we can probably have some impact. Because to raise an awareness in a half-hearted way, or just to tick the box exercise, that's not where the power of it lies. And for me personally, as a communicator, storytelling is so important. So when we raise these awareness, so thank you for reaching out to people to contribute to this episode, because it's our stories, our human stories, that will add the power to these conversations. That is the bullet in the gun, so to speak, in terms of really having impact.
Yeah. I would add to that all of these days and months are really significant.
Yeah.
And they give us an opportunity to be informed, educated, aware. You don't have to agree with all of them. Pick the ones that resonate with you and that are closest to your values. And that's the same thing I would say with organizations is it's got to be value led. I have a real problem when we come to June and we see pink everywhere because it's Pride Month and an organization is not an ally, then don't do the pink. A lot of organizations that I've worked for as the marketing leader, I've not participated in Pride Month because that is not the values of the organization. Yes, there might be an organization that's about diversity, etc. That's fantastic, but diversity doesn't only mean sexual diversity or identity. And so I think it really needs to resonate with your values so that you can feel passionate and that you're carrying it through and you're doing more to spread the word. So I think all of these days are really important. It gives a moment for you to be informed, educated, and to spread word. And if you want to do more, get involved. But I do understand that there can be a lot of communication fatigue,
Jen?
100%. And so pick the ones that are important to you and that you can lend support to, I think is the message. Okay, sis. I think in terms of maybe just wrapping up, it's important to stay educated. AIDS and STDs are part of our lives, and it's part of the risk of being sexually active. We all have the right to explore our identity and our preference as we choose. We do need to do so responsibly. Be aware that for some people, you don't ask, I won't tell. So ask. You need to advocate for yourself. We see that relationships are changing shapes and ways of doing it. So AIDS is not a one person or one look disease. And U equals U. So undetectable means untransferable. PrEP is not only for gay men. You can ask and you should ask about statuses upfront if you so choose. But I think really our voice in terms of this episode is just still pretty much part of our lives. It's still alive. People are still being infected. People are still dying from the disease. And be smart out there.
Yeah. Be smart.
Is my message.
Yes,
Be
absolutely.
smart while you're being passionate.
That's right. Smart passion. That should be a new hashtag. Sis, thank you for bringing this back into my awareness. I feel like I've gained a lot more information through this conversation. And that's just, even just having an awareness of the world we live in and the community around us. It's good to be aware that people are experiencing different things in their lives, and the person right next to you might be HIV/AIDS for them. The person to the other side might be something else. And so just having compassion, kindness. And I think for me, just having that desire to learn more is what makes us interesting as people. Just stay in question. If you come across someone who has HIV/AIDS or has someone in their family who has it, ask them questions. Be interested in people's lives. And we get to do that because we're doing this podcast. And so I'm really loving that we have this opportunity. For those of you who are watching, thank you so much for being with us today. We'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the questions that we raised and just in general, other topics that you may want us to talk about that you're passionate about that we might not be experts on. Because as we said, we're not the experts. We're here learning with you, discovering this wonderful world along with you and learning from you. So thank you for being with us.
I'll do the cheers on my own today.
You will. I'm all out of tequila. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks for listening. Remember to email us with comments, suggestions, feedback at notuspod@gmail.com. Subscribe to our channels on Instagram and Facebook, and catch us on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Thanks for listening, and until next week, we bid you farewell. Bye-bye.